It was a calm afternoon in a quiet American neighborhood. The sun was high, and the streets were nearly empty. Birds sat on the wires, and people walked their dogs peacefully. Nothing looked strange until a police siren suddenly screamed. In the air, a black car was driving slowly, obeying every rule. But behind it, red and blue lights flashed fast. A police cruiser followed closely, and its horn blared, "Pull over now." The officer shouted into the speaker. The driver, a woman alone, calmly steered the car to the side of the road. She parked, turned off the engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. She didn't panic. She didn't reach for her purse. She just sat still, quiet and calm. Officer Reynolds stepped out of his car. He was known in this area. Tall, rough, always serious. People said he had a look when he didn't like someone, and today, that look was on his face. He walked up to the car with a frown, hand on his gun. "License and registration," he said sharply, tapping the window. The woman inside slowly rolled the glass down. She looked at him with steady eyes. No fear, no confusion, just silence. "Did I do something wrong, officer?" she asked her, voice polite. Officer Reynolds squinted. "Don't get smart with me. I asked for your ID." She didn't argue. She simply handed over her license. He snatched it from her hand, glanced at it, then paused. "Her name?" He read it again. "Kamala Harris." The name felt familiar, but he didn't connect it yet. He looked her up and down. "Nice car, must be borrowed." "No," she said softly. "It's mine." He leaned in. "So where are you going, Miss Harris?" "I'm going to meet a group of students at a local school," he smirked. "Do they teach how to break the law in that school?" She stayed calm. "I wasn't speeding. I used my signal. I stopped at the sign. Can you tell me why I was pulled over?" The officer's face tightened. "You were driving suspiciously slow." "That's not a crime," she said gently. He slammed his hand on the roof of her car. "Don't talk back." Across the street, a young man on a bicycle stopped, then a woman with a stroller, then another man, holding a phone. People were starting to watch. Phones began to rise, record buttons were pressed, and the camera was now watching every move. Kamala noticed the attention but said nothing. Officer Reynolds was breathing harder now. "Get out of the car." "Am I under arrest?" she asked, still calm. "No, but I need to search your vehicle." "Do you have a warrant?" "I don't need one," he barked. "Not when someone looks like you." That sentence hit the air like fire. Even the people across the street heard it. A woman gasped, but one of the phones zoomed in. But Kamala didn't flinch. She unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly stepped out. She stood tall, dressed in a simple black suit, hair tied neatly, her shoes clean, her hands at her sides. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone with a story. The officer walked around the car, opening doors roughly, checking the back seat, opening the glove box. He searched and searched but found nothing. Then, he slammed the trunk shut, his face now red. "You think you're something special, huh?" he muttered. "Kamal." I looked at him, and for the first time, there was a small smile on her lips. "I didn't say anything. You did." The officer walked toward her, clearly angry. "You know what? Maybe you do need to be taken in." "On what charge?" she asked. "Obstruction, attitude, suspicious behavior." "And what does suspicious look like to you, Officer Reynolds?" He didn't answer, but the crowd around them did. One voice from behind a tree shouted, "We're recording, man." Another said, "She didn't do anything." A child asked his mom, "Why is the policeman yelling at the lady?" The crowd was growing. And Kamala stood still, quiet, like a statue of calm in a storm. The officer pulled out his handcuffs. "Turn around," but before she could move, a voice rang out. It was sharp, powerful, and came from a man walking fast across the road, waving his hands. "Stop right there," the man said. He wore a suit and had a badge in his hand. He showed it clearly. "I'm with the mayor's office." He walked straight up to the officer. "Do you know who this woman is?" The officer blinked. "Do you have any idea who you're arresting on camera right now?" Officer Reynolds stuttered. "She said her name is Harris. Kamala Harris." The man cut in. "Former senator, former vice president, lawyer, human rights leader, and guest of honor at today's school event." Everything went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. The officer looked at Kamala again, now recognizing the face, the name, the presence. His face turned pale. His hand dropped, and every phone caught the moment. Kamala didn't shout, didn't curse. She simply looked at him and said, "Now you know who I am. But earlier, when you didn't, how did you treat me?" He couldn't answer. The cameras were still rolling. Kamala turned to the crowd. "Thank you for recording, for witnessing, not for me, but for everyone who doesn't have a camera nearby." Then she walked back to her car, started the engine, and drove off. But the story was just beginning, because that video was already online, and by nightfall, the whole country would be watching. The next morning, the city woke up as usual, but something had changed. People were checking their phones, opening messages, and watching a video that was spreading fast across every screen. It had no music, no title, no fancy effects, just a quiet room, a loud man, and a woman who calmly stood up and changed everything. That woman was Kamala Harris. The video of her standing on stage, speaking with strength and grace, had been recorded by a young woman named Tessa. She had sat near the back of the ballroom the night before. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. She had come as a guest's assistant, holding a coat and staying quiet. But when Kamala started speaking, something inside Tessa told her, this moment matters. She had pressed record, and now, the world was watching. On social media, the video exploded. Millions of views in just hours. People were commenting, this is what leadership looks like. She didn't shout, she shook the whole room with calm. Victor Blake tried to humiliate her. She taught him a lesson without even raising her voice. The clip was shared by celebrities. Teachers, nurses, mothers, students. Everyone saw something different in Kamala's words, but they all felt the same thing. Respect, not forced respect. Earned respect. Back inside Kamala's office, her team was surprised. Ma'am, said her assistant Maya, holding up a tablet. Your speech last night, it's gone viral. Kamala looked up from her notes. I gave no speech last night. Maya smiled. Then whatever you did, the world is calling it the speech of the year. Kamala gently took the tablet and watched the video. Her face on screen was calm, her voice steady, but watching it back, she felt her hands tightened. Not because she was angry, but because she hadn't expected the world to hear it. She had only spoken because it was time, because enough was enough, and now, her quiet moment had become a national headline. Meanwhile, Victor Blake sat in his private office, red-faced, watching the same video on loop. He slammed his fist on the table. Who recorded this? His assistant didn't answer. Did we not ban phones? Wasn't this a private event? The assistant swallowed hard. Yes, sir, but someone slipped through. Victor stared at the screen. He saw himself laughing. He saw the audience clapping. He saw Kamala rise, and he saw his own face. Confused, shocked, defeated, he hated it. Take it down, he growled. The assistant shook his head. It's everywhere now, sir. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even the news channels. It can't be stopped. Victor turned away. He was a man who lived on power, and now the internet had taken that power and handed it to the one person he had tried to embarrass, Kamala Harris. All over the country, schools played Kamala's speech in classrooms. College students discussed her words in study halls. News anchors called it the calmest storm in political history. But Kamala stayed silent. She gave no interviews, she wrote no tweets, she made no follow-up speeches. She just went on with her day, visiting a community shelter, meeting families, listening to concerns. Cameras followed her, but she never looked into them. When a reporter tried to ask her, do you have a message for Mr. Blake? She smiled softly and replied, I've already spoken, and I believe people heard me. Far away in a small town, a high school girl named Lena sat on her bed, watching the clip over and over. She was a quiet student. Her parents had moved from another country. She had been bullied at school for her accent, her name, even her lunchbox. But when she saw Kamala standing on that stage, not shouting, not crying, just standing strong, something inside her changed. Lena stood up, walked to her desk, and wrote a letter. Dear Kamala Harris, I saw your video. I'm not brave like you, but I want to be. Today, I didn't hide my lunch. I didn't say it's okay when someone laughed. I just looked at them, like you did. I want to thank you. You didn't only speak for yourself. You spoke for girls like me. Love, Lena. She folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. She didn't know where to send it yet, but she believed it would find its way. That night, as Kamala sat quietly on her porch with a cup of tea, her phone rang. It was her mother's old friend Mrs. Gupta, now over 80, living in Chicago. My dear, the woman said with a warm voice, I watched you last night. You reminded me of your mother. Kamala smiled gently. She taught me everything, Mrs. Gupta chuckled. You didn't raise your voice, you raised a mirror, and the right people saw their reflection. That sentence stayed in Kamala's heart long after the call ended. You raised a mirror? That's what the world needed. Not louder voices, clearer reflections. Meanwhile, Victor Blake's world was falling apart. One of his business partners announced he was stepping away. A major event dropped him from the guest list. Even his own staff began handing in resignations. Victor sat alone in his giant office, watching the city lights. For years he had spoken with no fear, but now, no one wanted to listen. And the person he once mocked, the one he believed would stay quiet, had become a voice for millions. He poured a glass of whiskey, but this time, it didn't taste like victory, it tasted like regret. Somewhere else in the same city, Tessa, the young woman who recorded the video, sat in her small apartment, stunned. News channels were calling her a citizen journalist. Her inbox was full. People wanted to know, why did you record it? She smiled and replied to every message with one sentence. Because silence is easy to ignore, but truth is impossible to forget. And Kamala, she continued, walking forward, quiet, calm, strong, not seeking applause, not chasing revenge, just doing what her mother had taught her. Speak when it matters. Even if the world expects you to stay silent, because the voice they underestimated had just changed everything. The world was still spinning from Kamala's quiet but powerful stand. One speech, no script, no stage lights, no reporters, had gone beyond borders, cultures, and languages. She didn't plan it. She didn't promote it. She didn't even know it was being recorded, but now, The world had seen it, and the world had decided, this voice matters. On the third day after the video went viral, Kamala Harris still hadn't spoken to the media, not once. She refused TV interviews, ignored press calls, and told her team, let the silence do the work. Instead of talking more, she spent her time in a small community clinic helping immigrant families get access to legal aid and healthcare. She listened to mothers tell stories of working 2 jobs. She hugged children too afraid to speak in English, and every person who saw her whispered the same thought. She's not just a leader, she's one of us. But outside the clinic, the world was growing louder. News anchors called her the new voice of courage. Social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag KAMALA stands, hashtag voice of calm, hashtag she did speak videos, popped up showing young girls in classrooms practicing speeches that started with, you expected me to stay silent. One girl in New York performed the speech as a school play. Another in India translated it into Hindi. A woman in Kenya recorded herself reading it in Swahili. Kamala's words had become more than a reaction. They had become a movement. Victor Blake, on the other hand, was falling. Every channel showed the same clip. Kamala walking toward the stage, speaking with calm fire, while Victor stood frozen. He tried to defend himself, releasing a video. Online, I was only joking. I didn't mean it that way. I've supported women leaders before. But the internet didn't forget the way he laughed, the tone he used, the disrespect in his eyes. In response, a simple video was shared again and again, Kamala's face looking straight at him, saying, you believe strength comes from volume, but real strength comes from knowing when to speak and when to listen. Victor had nothing left to say somewhere far from the noise, in a small town in Georgia. Lena, the quiet high school girl who had written to Kamala, finally, handed her letter to her school counselor. I don't know if she read it, Lena said softly, but I had to say thank you. The counselor, Ms. Harper, smiled gently. I'll make sure it gets to the right people. Lena walked home that day with her head a little higher. For the first time, she felt like she mattered, not just in silence, but in voice. Kamala's team had received over 45,000 emails in 48 hours. Most said things like, thank you for speaking for all of us who couldn't. Your silence afterward spoke louder than any headline. Because of you, I stood up to my boss today. My daughter wants to be like you. Kamala read some of them at night, alone, under a small lamp with her glasses on. One letter stood out. It said, you gave a speech that felt like a mirror, and I didn't like what I saw, but I needed it. I've been loud for all the wrong reasons. You taught me to listen. A man who is changing. She folded that letter carefully and placed it in her journal. She didn't know who sent it, but she believed in what it said, because real change begins when people face their reflection. One evening, while Kamala was planting flowers outside her home, something her mother used to do to quiet the mind, a black car pulled up at the gate. A young woman stepped out holding a small envelope. I'm from the Office of Public Letters, she said. This one was hand-delivered from a girl named Lena. Kamala took the letter with a soft smile and thanked her that night. She opened it. She read every word slowly. She felt her eyes fill with tears when she reached the final line. You didn't only speak for yourself. You spoke for girls like me. Kamala closed her eyes. This was the reason she stood up that night. Not for power, not for revenge, but for girls like Lena. Elsewhere, the girl named Tessa, who had secretly recorded the moment, was being invited to speak at schools and media panels. People were calling her brave, but when asked why she recorded it, she always said the same thing. It wasn't about breaking the rules. It was about saving a moment that would change lives. Her phone had been shaky. Her angle wasn't perfect, but her intention was, and intention is everything. As the week continued, something amazing began to happen. Other women began speaking up. A black professor from Louisiana shared her story of being silenced during a university board meeting and how she found courage after watching Kamala's speech. A Muslim lawyer posted her story about being told she was too soft-spoken for the courtroom, and now she was teaching law to refugee women. Even young boys wrote in, saying they were learning to listen more, speak less, and treat people with respect, not because they were told to, but because they now understood why. Victor Blake disappeared from public view. He canceled his speeches. He declined interviews, and slowly, his empire began to shrink, not from law or politics, but from something more powerful. The people had chosen to walk away from him. His silence now wasn't powerful, it was empty. Meanwhile, Kamala remained focused on the work. She didn't build a campaign around her speech. She didn't sell books or shirts, but she did reply to one letter. She wrote to Lena, Dear Lena, I read your words, and they touched me deeply. You are already brave. You are already leading, just by being yourself. Always remember, silence is peaceful, but voice is powerful. And when the time is right, speak not to prove others wrong, but to show what's right. I believe in you. Love, Kamala. And so, without planning it, without trying to go viral, and without raising her voice, Kamala Harris had done something rare. She had turned an insult into a lesson, an attack into a mirror, and silence into strength. The world hadn't just heard her, the world had felt her, and that feeling was not going away. The world had changed in just 1 week. One calm speech had shaken the very foundation of power. Kamala Harris had not shouted. She had not insulted. But her quiet strength had left a deep mark, not only on those who heard her that night, but on millions watching around the world. While people celebrated her courage, some behind closed doors were growing nervous. Because nothing frightens power more than truth spoken calmly. Victor Blake sat in his private estate, surrounded by tall walls, empty halls, and silent phones. His name had once opened every door. But now, those same doors were quietly closing. His PR team quit. His closest partners walked away. Sponsors pulled funding from his business summits. His emails got no replies. And it all started from that. One night, when Kamala stood up and showed the world who he really was, Victor had never felt powerless before. Now, he didn't know what to do with silence. He looked at the mirror and whispered, "She ruined me." But the truth was, he ruined himself. In Washington, some political circles began to shift uneasily. Kamala had become more than a politician. She had become a symbol, not because she tried to, but because she had simply spoken with honesty. Not everyone liked it. Some people whispered in meetings, "She's getting too much attention. She's too popular right now, dangerous for the old system. If we let this grow, we might lose control." They weren't worried about her words. They were worried about her effect, because for the first time in a long time, people weren't just following a face. They were following values. And that scared those who held power for the wrong reasons. Kamala, however, noticed the change. Invitations stopped coming from certain groups. Important events left her name off the list. Her staff received calls, like, "Maybe she should lay low. Don't make her a hero. It'll create problems. We can't protect her if she stirs the pot too much." But Kamala didn't flinch. She wasn't in this to be liked. She was in this to serve. And now, more than ever, people needed a voice that wasn't afraid. One morning, as she walked into a meeting with education leaders, her assistant Maya whispered, "They've changed the agenda. They want you to skip your prepared speech." Kamala paused. "Why?" Maya looked uncomfortable. "They said it's better if you just listen today. They're afraid you'll go viral again." Kamala smiled. "Softly, I don't speak to go viral," she said. "I speak when silence would be wrong." She entered the room, took her seat, and when it was her turn, she stood just like she did that night and delivered her speech anyway. And though the cameras weren't rolling, everyone in the room knew, this woman cannot be controlled by fear. Behind the scenes, attacks started quietly. Old articles resurfaced. Critics began twisting her past speeches. Fake rumors spread online, some saying she was too emotional, others saying she disrespected tradition. But Kamala did not respond. She didn't waste energy on lies. Instead, she focused on people. She visited a group of young female students in Atlanta. No press, no photographers. She just sat with them on the floor, listening to their dreams and fears. One girl said, "They say I talk too much in class." Kamala smiled. "They said that about me too." The girl blinked. "Really?" "Yes," Kamala said. "And now the world listens when I speak." The room filled with quiet joy. Hope had entered the room without fanfare, without cameras. But far away, in a dark office, a group of powerful men gathered around a table. They didn't wear uniforms, but their ties were sharp, and their intentions sharpest. "We have to do something," one said. "She's turning calm honesty into influence," said another. "If we let this continue," the third added, "more people will start standing up. Not just women, not just immigrants. Everyone." They didn't fear Kamala because she was loud. They feared her because she had nothing to prove, and everything to protect. "She's dangerous," someone whispered. Then came the final order: discredit her, quietly, from the inside. Soon after, small cracks were placed in her path. Her travel funds were delayed. A senior staff member was suddenly reassigned. An event where she was supposed to speak was accidentally cancelled. It was all done politely, professionally, so no one could point fingers. But Kamala noticed. So did Maya. "They want you to stop," Maya said one evening. Kamala nodded. "They don't want my silence. They want my obedience." Maya looked worried. "What will you do?" Kamala took a deep breath and replied, "Exactly what I've always done. Speak when it matters." That same night, Kamala received a private message from Lena, the high school girl. It said, "Today I told my school principal about a teacher who kept ignoring the immigrant kids. I was scared, but I remembered how you stood up. He listened, he promised change. Thank you for giving me courage." Kamala read it twice. This was the real reason she kept going. Not for headlines, not for history, for the next generation, who were learning how to be brave. Meanwhile, Victor tried to fight back. He hired a new media team. He posted a long letter, trying to act like a victim. He blamed cancel culture and emotional politics. But no one believed him anymore. People weren't canceling him. He had simply revealed himself, and the world saw the truth. He was not being silenced. He was just being heard less, because the world had found better voices to follow. And Kamala? She continued forward. Not loudly, not with anger, but with steady steps, clear eyes, and quiet power. She knew the attacks would come. She knew some doors would close. But she also knew, When one person speaks with truth, it gives 100 others the strength to stand. And that is something no system can stop. The world was still watching Kamala Harris, some with hope, some with fear, but everyone watching. But Kamala wasn't watching the world. She was watching something else. The quiet changes, the small moments, the soft ripples that grew from that one night when she stood up and spoke with calm power, because real change doesn't always come from big speeches. Sometimes, it begins with a single seed, and Kamala had planted one. In a small town outside Atlanta, Lena, the shy high school girl, sat at her desk staring at her teacher. Her heart was beating fast. She had raised her hand, and now for the first time the whole class was looking at her. "I don't think it's fair," she said, her voice shaking, "that some kids always get called on and others are ignored just because they don't speak loud or perfect." English. The room went silent. The teacher blinked. "Lena, I didn't realize it's okay," Lena said, gaining strength. "But we notice, and it hurts." The class was quiet. Some kids nodded. One girl from El Salvador gave her a thumbs up. Later that day, the teacher pulled Lena aside. "Thank you. You helped me see something I didn't see before. I'll do better." Lena smiled. She had spoken, and someone had listened. That night, Lena wrote in her journal, "I used to think being quiet meant I was weak, but Kamala was quiet, and she changed everything. Maybe I can too." In another part of the country, a nurse named Elsa was watching Kamala's speech again. She had watched it at least 10 times. She worked the night shift in a city hospital, often ignored by her supervisors. That night, a new doctor shouted at her in front of patients. For years, Elsa would have stayed silent, but this time, she stepped forward and said, "Speak to me. With respect, I'm not your assistant. I'm a nurse, and I matter." The room froze. The doctor backed away. "I didn't mean you did," Elsa replied softly, "but now you know better." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lose control. She just stood tall, the way Kamala had, and spoke the truth. Meanwhile, Kamala's team continued working quietly. Maya, her assistant, placed a small corkboard on the office wall at the top. She pinned a note that said, "What one voice can do each day." She added stories, emails, messages, letters from people inspired by Kamala, not fans, not followers. Voices. A student who started a support group for bullied girls. A grocery store worker who reported a manager's unfair treatment. A young father who stood up for his wife at a family gathering. Each story started the same way. After I saw Kamala's speech, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Kamala would look at the wall each morning. She didn't smile with pride. She just breathed in deeply and whispered to herself, "Keep going." But not everyone was cheering. In the background, quiet resistance was still growing. Some powerful people tried to control the message. They said Kamala was creating division. They called her speech too emotional. They claimed she had embarrassed important people. They couldn't erase her words, so they tried to rewrite the meaning. But truth doesn't fade, because it lives in the people who carry it forward. At a university in Chicago, a young woman named Zara stood on stage at a debate competition. She wore a simple scarf and held no notes. "I was told I speak too softly for this stage," she began, "that I should act stronger, louder, more American." She paused. "But I watched Kamala Harris speak without shouting. I watched her remind the world that real strength can be quiet. So today, I speak in my own voice, not borrowed, not broken." The room burst into applause. Zara didn't win the trophy that day, but she won something bigger, the confidence to be fully herself. Back in Washington, Kamala visited a school with no cameras, no news reporters, just young students and simple desks. She was asked to speak, but instead, she sat with a group of children and listened. One boy asked, "Do you get scared when people don't like what you say?" Kamala looked at him and replied gently, "Yes, but being scared doesn't mean we're wrong. It just means we're doing something brave." Later that afternoon, she walked through a park alone. A woman passing by stopped and said, "Kamala Harris." Kamala smiled. "Yes, ma'am," the woman said. "I'm not into politics. I never was. But you made me believe that a person can lead and still have a soul." She didn't ask for a photo. She just nodded and walked on. Victor Blake saw all of this happening from the shadows. His name had disappeared from talk shows. His businesses were shrinking. His public image was damaged. He watched the clips, read the headlines, saw the crowds Kamala was drawing without even trying, and he realized something that made him truly afraid. He had tried to silence her, but instead, he made her more powerful than ever, because her voice had become a spark in millions of hearts. In a quiet moment at night, Kamala sat in her garden, under the stars. Maya joined her with a stack of new letters. Kamala opened one. From a child who wrote in purple crayon, "I told my grandma I want to be like you." She cried happy. Kamala closed her eyes. This not the fame, not the politics. This was what mattered. A seed had been planted, and it was growing in the most unexpected places. Classrooms, homes, hospitals, streets, and hearts. All because, in one room, on one night, she refused to stay silent. The silence after Kamala's speech didn't remain silence for long. It became a voice. Then many voices. And soon, a movement. across countries, across time zones, across language barriers. Something had awakened. Not because Kamala had shouted, not because she had fought, but because she had stood with grace and reminded people that calm truth can be more powerful than noise. The world was now responding. In Paris, a group of university students held a public gathering called Stand Quiet, Speak Strong. They played Kamala's clip with French subtitles. When it ended, one student stood up and said, "This is how we lead. Not with fists, but with fire inside." In Brazil, a young teacher played the speech for her 5th grade class. The children were silent for a moment after watching it. Then one girl raised her hand and said, "She speaks like my mother, soft, but strong." In Kenya, a group of women shared Kamala's speech at a community center. Many didn't speak English, but they didn't need translation. They understood her tone, her eyes, her pause before power. The world had heard her, and it was now speaking. Back in the United States, Kamala's schedule became full without her trying, but not with press interviews or fancy events. She was being invited to schools, hospitals, women's shelters, youth centers, and everywhere she went, she said the same thing. You already have a voice, you just have to believe it matters. One special invitation came from an unexpected place, a rural town in Texas where Kamala had once lost an election by a large margin. Now, students there had started a club called Speak Anyway. They asked Kamala to come. Her team was unsure. "This might not be safe, ma'am." But Kamala smiled. "They asked me, that's all the safety I need." She went. No cameras, just a small gym full of teenagers. A boy named Miguel stood up and asked, "How do you stay calm when people attack you?" Kamala looked at him and said gently, "Because if I answer with anger, they win. But if I answer with truth, I win. And others get braver too." The gym clapped, not loud but warm. And in that moment, one town began to heal. Meanwhile, Victor Blake was watching, not just watching boiling. He turned on the TV. There she was. He opened social media. There she was. He called a news outlet and offered an interview. They said, "Sorry, Mr. Blake, we're full this week." He wasn't just out of power, he was now irrelevant. He blamed Kamala, but deep down he knew. He did this to himself. Elsewhere, a young woman named Zara, who had spoken at her college in Part 5, was now being interviewed by a local newspaper. When asked what gave her courage, she said, "Kamala Harris didn't just speak for herself. She made space for the rest of us. She opened the door. We're just walking through it now." Her photo standing proud with her head held high went viral, and Kamala, she saw it late at night on her phone and whispered with a smile, "You're leading now?" That week, something remarkable happened. A Republican senator who had never worked with Kamala before stood in front of the Senate floor and said, "I disagreed with many of her policies, but I watched her speak that night, and I learned something. Sometimes politics needs to step aside for dignity." She reminded me of that. The room was stunned. Some clapped. Most sat still. But Kamala was already gone from the room, because she wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing change. In Los Angeles, Tessa, the young woman who had secretly recorded Kamala's original speech, was now working with a nonprofit group teaching media literacy in schools. When asked if she wanted fame, she said, "No, I just want to help more people see truth before it gets buried again." She received a handwritten thank you note from Kamala. "You held up a mirror, Tessa, not just to them, but to all of us. Thank you for not blinking." Tessa framed it and kept it on her desk, not to show off, but to remind herself. Why? She pressed record. Back in Kamala's small office, the corkboard Maya had started was now full. Stories, drawings, letters from all over the world. They didn't talk about fame or politics. They talked about courage, dignity, respect. Voice. Maya pinned a new note at the center. "This is what happens when the world listens." But it wasn't all applause. There were still people trying to bring Kamala down. Anonymous articles accused her of chasing sympathy. Some said she was using emotion to win hearts instead of facts. But the truth was clear. She had spoken once, with calm, with truth, with no script, and it echoed louder than 1,000 microphones, because it wasn't just her voice anymore, it was theirs. Lena, Zara, Tessa, Miguel, Elsa, and thousands more. One night, Kamala walked through a quiet street after a long day. She was tired. A little girl came running up to her with a notebook. "Are you the woman from the video?" Kamala smiled. "I think so." The girl handed her the notebook. On it was written, "When I grow up, I want to speak like you. Not loud, just true." Kamala crouched down, looked the girl in the eyes, and said, "You already do." The world had responded, and it hadn't responded with riots, or chaos or noise. It responded with clarity, with calm, with courage, with connection. All because one woman chose to speak when everyone expected her to stay silent. The world had watched Kamala Harris turn one quiet moment into a movement. She had planted seeds, others had watered them, and now courage was growing in places where fear used to live. But in the middle of the light, something unexpected arrived. A letter. Plain envelope, no name on the front, no title, just one word, written in clean handwriting. Kamala Maya found it mixed in with dozens of others in the office mail. She almost placed it under the usual pile of fan letters, but something about it made her pause. The handwriting wasn't rushed. It wasn't decorated. It felt heavy. She walked into Kamala's office and placed it on her desk. "You might want to read this one personally." Kamala looked up from her notes, curious. She opened the envelope slowly and read, "Dear Kamala, you don't know me, but I know him, the man who laughed at you that night. I knew Victor Blake when he was just a boy with loud dreams and sharp edges. I worked in his home for 8 years. I was the maid, the cook, the one no one noticed. I watched him grow. I watched the way he spoke to people when no one important was watching. He didn't change on that stage. That was always who he was. But you changed something. You changed what people accept. You changed what people cheer for. I've waited my whole life to see a woman stand up and say, calmly, this is enough. You didn't scream. You didn't curse. You simply stood. And in that moment, I felt like someone had stood for me, too. I never had the courage to say anything. I was scared. But after your speech, I told my granddaughter about what I saw. I told her, you don't need to shout. You just need to be clear." She smiled and said, "Like Kamala, yes, like Kamala. Thank you for being the voice I didn't have." Sincerely, a woman who finally spoke. Kamala didn't move. Her hands rested on the paper, but her eyes were far away. Somewhere deeper, she read the letter again, then once more. This wasn't a letter of praise. It wasn't a fan note. It was something heavier. It was a memory, a confession, a bridge, and it came from inside the same world Victor Blake had tried to hide. Later that night, Kamala sat on her porch with the letter folded in her hand. She looked at the stars, then at the trees, then at nothing at all. Maya came out quietly. "You okay?" Kamala nodded. This is the kind of letter that doesn't ask for an answer. It just gives you peace." Maya sat beside her. "Do you want to respond?" Kamala thought for a moment. "Not in words. But I know what I have to do." The next morning, Kamala asked her team to find out where the letter had been sent from. "No invasion," she said. "Just the sense of who she is. That's enough." A week later, Maya came back with a location. A small town in South Carolina. The return address had been a postal box used by retired workers. Kamala planned a visit. Quiet, private, no press, just her, Maya, and a car that carried the weight of something unfinished. They arrived at a small community building. Inside were retired women from all backgrounds, African American, Latina, Native, white. They sat in folding chairs, playing bingo, drinking tea, laughing softly. When Kamala walked in, the room paused. Someone whispered, "Is that?" But Kamala didn't make a speech. She simply smiled, walked in and said, "I came to listen." One of the older women stood slowly. It was her, the letter writer. She wore a floral blouse and had strong, weathered hands. They didn't speak at first. They just hugged. A long, quiet hug because some pain doesn't need words. It just needs to be shared. After the hug, the woman said, "I never said anything when I worked for him. I didn't believe people would care." Kamala held her hand. "I care." The woman smiled, eyes filled with years of silence. "He thought he was too big to fall. You didn't push him, but you showed the world who he really was. That was enough." Kamala looked around the room. "You all have voices. If you ever want to use them, I'll help you be heard." One woman clapped, another nodded. Then a third said, "Sometimes we just need one person to go first." Kamala replied, "Then I'm glad I went first, but I won't be the last." Back in the city, Victor Blake was pacing his office. He had seen the news. He heard whispers. Kamala had visited his past. He wasn't just being challenged anymore. He was being revealed, and that frightened him more than any political loss. Because you can argue with a voice, but you can't fight the truth of who you've been. Later that week, Kamala was asked to speak at a leadership forum. Instead of talking about policy or politics, she told the story of the letter. She didn't name the woman. She just said, "Sometimes, when we speak up, we don't just help those in front of us. We reach back to the ones who never got the chance, and we tell them, your silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. But now, it's safe to speak." The room stood in silence. Then it stood in applause. Kamala left that night with a feeling she couldn't describe. It wasn't victory. It wasn't pride. It was deeper. Healing, not just hers, not just the woman's, but a healing that reached across generations of women who were never allowed to speak. The world had crowned her a leader. Some called her a hero. Others called her a movement. But Kamala Harris never asked for any of that. She didn't want a throne. She didn't want statues. She only wanted one thing, to leave behind something better than what she found. And she had done that not with power, but with truth. After the letter from the retired maid, everything changed for Kamala. Again, the media wanted more interviews. Publishers offered her book deals. Political leaders tried to use her name to gain favor, but she turned them all down. "No," she said softly, "this moment doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people it woke up." Instead of speeches, she visited schools. Instead of red carpets, she sat in quiet classrooms. Instead of news shows, she joined healing circles for women who had stayed silent for years. In each room, she gave the same message. You don't need to lead a country to change one. You just have to change one life. Start with your own. Meanwhile, in homes across the world, small changes began happening. A father apologized to his daughter for never listening. A boss asked for feedback from a quiet intern. A teacher started calling on the students who always sat in the back. No one gave Kamala credit for these things. And that was okay. Because real impact doesn't ask for credit. It leaves a mark without needing to sign its name. One day, Maya came into Kamala's office holding her tablet. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "you've been nominated for the highest civilian honor." Kamala looked up, surprised. "For what?" Maya smiled. "For reminding the world that stillness can be power, and dignity can be a weapon." Kamala took the tablet, read the official letter, then set it aside. "I'm honored," she said gently, "but I'm not done yet." Weeks later, she was invited to a large summit, one of the biggest in the country. The theme, Voices of the Future. World leaders would be there. CEOs, scientists, educators, artists. And she was asked to give the final speech. Her team prepared a big stage. Lights, cameras, scripts, applause. But Kamala did something different. When her name was called, she walked up slowly, wearing a simple suit. No teleprompter, no notes. She looked at the huge crowd, then said, "You expected me to give a powerful speech. But power doesn't come from standing here. It comes from what you do. After this moment ends," she paused, "my voice is not more important than yours. I just used mine. And now it's your turn." She stepped back. The crowd was stunned. Then slowly, they rose to their feet. It wasn't the loudest applause of her life, but it was the truest, because this wasn't a performance. It was a passing of the torch, and people were ready to carry it. Later that evening, as Kamala walked alone through a quiet garden near the summit, a small voice called out, "Excuse me, Vice President Harris." She turned out. A teenage girl stood there, holding a notebook. Shy, nervous. Kamala smiled. "Yes." The girl stepped forward. "I wrote something, inspired by what you said. It's not perfect, but I think I'm ready to read it." Kamala sat on a bench and nodded. "I'd love to hear it." The girl opened her notebook, her voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. "They told me I was soft, that I'd never lead, that silence meant weakness. But then I saw someone who didn't shout, who didn't beg, who just stood. And suddenly, my silence wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting for me to use it." When she finished, Kamala clapped softly, her eyes full. "What's your name?" she asked. The girl whispered, "Asha." Kamala placed a hand on her shoulder. "Asha, your voice will go further than mine ever could. Keep using it." That night, back in her quiet home, Kamala opened her journal. She didn't write much. Just one simple line. Asterisk, asterisk. She didn't want a throne. She wanted a mirror. And now the world can finally see itself. Asterisk, asterisk. Months passed. The storm of media faded. The headlines changed. New stories rose. But something had shifted forever. Because, in schools, offices, families, and hearts, people remembered. They remembered the woman who stood, not to shout, but to show them how to rise without rage, how to speak without screaming, how to be still, but strong. And even long after Kamala stepped away from public life, the words lived on. You expected me to stay silent. But silence was never the absence of strength. It was the preparation of it.